Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to yet another cloud communications industry briefing. My name is Tim McLean. I'm the director of marketing here at Commio, and I want to thank you for, spending a good 30, 45 minutes with us here to go through a really important topic. And of course, whenever I get into the text messaging side of what we do here at Commio, I always bring in my good friend Scott Navratil here. He's our VP of Customer Retention and Growth, as well as one of the original folks over at Telly, which we purchased and rolled into Commio. So, Scott, welcome back in.
Welcome. Yeah, thank you. I just noticed I was taking a sip of coffee. My cup says Dallas on it, and of course I'm in Denver,
Oh,
and the Avalanche play Dallas tonight. So I just realized I'm like, what did I do? I can't believe I just did that.
you're mixing your metaphors, and that's bad
Uh,
karma. Yeah, you shouldn't do that.
yeah, yeah. And we're
But
not going to talk about the Nuggets right now. So after last
okay,
night's game, but yeah, great to be here. So
gotcha. No, no. Well, glad you had a chance. You could come and join us for this. I think it's an important topic, and I know Scott, you and I have had many webinars to talk about messaging. And I feel like I always start with the same statement, which is very true, which is, when I started at Think before we became Cameo, there was basically none of this regulation, none of this registration was necessary. People could literally turn on phone numbers and send messages the same day and almost send as much as they want in any way they wanted.
hmm
And surely that made it easy to do business and to do text messaging, but it also opened the door to, let's call them, bad actors and challenging, traffic. And so over the years now, and especially in the last two, we've really seen this whole marketplace change. And in particular, what I find interesting, Scott, is like, obviously I get text messages all day long on this thing, and I love it when the texts come from a local business and they're using, in my case, a 919 area code, right? So
hmm
that is a 10-digit number that is from my area code. So I know right away it's a local business, and it really does give kind of the text an extra something in terms of attention, right? So
Yep.
that's why we really wanted to call everybody together to talk about how can you be successful in the current regime with all the changes the carriers have made by using local phone numbers for text messaging, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it's, and we'll get into the other flavors as well and why you would maybe choose one over the other. But again, we find that, 10-digit long code has become one of the most preferred formats, for sending in. Those numbers do
hmm
do something great, and I think it's a couple of reasons why, right? And it's like, 8.4 trillion text messages were sent globally last year. That's 23 billion text messages a day. Um, that's a lot, and I think you'd agree too that we see a lot of our customers who are now omni-channel. So there's always going to be a voice component. A lot of these people are going to have a call center or at least have, people on call. But text messaging is added a really nice layer on top. And you really ideally want to be doing both because um, people see them. If they're going to respond, they usually do it within minutes.
hmm
And customers, and this is the funny part, customers expect to have the option to text.
Yep.
Um, and my son has said that many times. He goes, Dad, I'm texting this car dealer. I'm interested in this car, and they're not responding. And I'm like, what are you texting? Well, I'm texting their phone number. And I'm like, well, okay. Maybe they can't accept text messages. And the good news is you can turn any local phone number into a
Right.
number that can accept text, right? So
Yep.
even numbers that you've used for years as a business, you can immediately turn it on. And by the way, in a former life, I worked with a lot of auto dealers, and when that technology finally was turned on or made available to them, they were shocked to find when they turned it
hmm
on in the platform that they had text messages waiting for them or that had been sent weeks or months ago. Um,
Yep.
Interesting. It's a whole different world. But two important things on this slide, Scott, before we continue, is there were also roughly, 19 billion spam texts sent in March. That was an estimate from
hmm
one group. So we know that we're sort of living in this world where, voice and text messaging can be used by good actors for great things, but there's still sort of this layer of spam that we're still working through. And that's partially why we wanted to do this webinar to bring everybody up to speed on, look, if you're going to be
hmm
using these local numbers, in order to reduce spam and also increase, the quality of the communications, now you need to register. And I don't want to get too far ahead, but there's now a process in place for people to identify themselves and register to make sure that the mobile carriers approve that traffic, right? And
Mhm.
monitor it. And also, when something happens, because something might happen, they know who to go to find the original source of the messages. So spam is still with us, right? It still happens.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point. I mean, the thing about spam too is that out of that 19.2 billion spam texts that were sent, there's probably a large percentage of that was unintentional spam,
Yes.
meaning customers, legitimate businesses, right, sending out legitimate texts, use specific keywords or specific phrases and combination thereof, and it was flagged as spam,
Mm.
right? And that's the other thing too that we'll talk to, right, is really the content, how you form your content, the tone of your content, and the required components, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And
very
that's
important.
also, yeah, absolutely. And it's also, Scott, why this is sort of the year of know your customer, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we as a provider of these services, as well as the businesses that that do business with us, um, we have to know our customers and they have to know their customers so that if there's any sort of a data breach or somebody takes control of their account, and this has happened, it's pretty rare.
Mm-hmm.
Middle of the night, somebody logs into an existing account and they start sending spam. So it does happen. So
Yep.
the good news
Yep.
is, I think, I'm just going to skip to the end and then we'll start going through it. But if you dot your I's and cross your T's, if you work with somebody like Commio, we know you know your customers, you register
Mm-hmm.
everything, you follow all the steps. There's no reason why you can't be really highly successful, especially with 10-digit long code,
Yep.
and make it an important part of what you do and save, make sure you're not overspending on. Anyway, it's something that's very doable, but it's a new world. So we're going to go through all of this. And by the way,
Yep.
one last thing before we move on, Scott, this just came to us, and by the way, we've already required this by our customers now for several months, but the upstream carriers are now saying to the entire marketplace, for 10-digit long code texting, that all the campaigns and brands have to be registered just before the end of the year. So
Yep.
this time period of allowing unregistered traffic is coming to an end, and Q4 will be it. So after that, all the
Yep.
traffic has to be, and by the way, that comes right from the mobile providers, the AT&Ts and the Verizons of the world.
Yep.
They require that. So it's important
Yeah,
to keep in mind.
toll free and short code are already required. You can't send a text message without registering, and having the campaign and the brand pre-vetted. And then
Right.
10 DLC, I mean, a lot of the DCAs already require that,
Yeah.
that everything be registered, and this is really just kind of putting that finality on it.
Yep.
And the amount of traffic that's going through unregistered is very, very small. It still does exist, but the
Yeah.
other part of that too is, if you're sending unregistered, it's heavily filtered. The surcharges are ridiculous on unregistered traffic. And so I think now the campaign registry process has kind of been refined enough, and it's gone through a lot of different changes and enhancements. I think the process is a lot better today than it was, when it first came out a couple of years ago. And so I think the process now, if you follow kind of the stuff that we're going to cover, I mean, you really are going to have a great chance of success. And the key is too with 10DLC, you still have to, when you submit campaigns, you're still going to get charged the campaign fee. You're going to get charged a vetting fee.
Yeah.
And so it's super critical. It saves you money to make sure it's set up right and all of those key components are there. So when you do submit it, it gets approved. And I've been using this one lately. It's like, unapproved campaigns don't make you any money, right? You're not connecting with your customers if you can't get it approved. So it's
Yeah.
real critical to follow some of these steps.
Yeah, exactly. And I think last, but just an important caveat. And then actually our first question, which I think is good to answer it now. But keep in mind too that if you are working with somebody, with a provider for a new campaign or something, there's still going to be a vector for you to be able to test first, right? So we don't send a lot of test messages, but if somebody's just getting set up for the first time, we have a way to make sure you can still test. Anyway,
Yep.
just as
There's
an FYI.
specific use cases for that.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
again, if you're sending one or two, right, there's a little bit of an allowance,
right.
but you can't really run any production traffic that's unregistered. So
That's
good
right.
point.
That's right. And John had a question, and Scott, we might as well answer it now. Is there any sort of an initiative to control the false positive spam triggers, because it is causing significant legitimate business interference for providers and our customers? Um, yeah, so I think false positive spam reports do happen, but that's just, yeah, I don't know how you would answer that.
So
Yeah.
I think the important thing to understand is that pretty much every text message, whether 10 DLC, toll free or short code, it goes through multiple layers of filtering, right?
Hmm.
So there's platforms out there like Mobile. A lot of the DCAs, a lot of the carriers use this, and it's basically looking at every text message, and it's using AI and other algorithms to look at that message to say, okay, what keywords, what type of phrases, it looks at all these different criteria to determine whether or not that message is spammy or not, right? So
Right.
now Verizon and T-Mobile, AT&T, and the DCAs have their own metrics of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable for spam. And typically, if you look at your overall volume, they want to see your spam percentage is less than 3%, right? Ideally, it's zero, but that's not realistic. So this is all automated, and typically what happens is when your messages trigger it throws up a red flag if the spam content's really using some bad content. It's missing a lot of stuff. It's got snowshoeing look and feel to it. I mean, I don't know if we'll go into that, but it goes into the compliance team for review. Then the compliance team starts actually looking at your messages. They start going to your websites. They follow your call to actions, and then they determine whether or not further action is, or they
Yeah.
call it enforcement action is required, right?
Right.
So
Right.
there's really, the false positive thing. I think, really kind of using the best practices and some of the stuff we'll cover today helps minimize that, but there's really no way to prevent it because there's so many different things that are looking at that traffic, and it's using algorithms and AI to kind of determine whether it's spammy or not, and you're going to
Yeah.
get false positives for
Yeah,
sure.
and the good news is, Scott, I think you'd agree, is that, when it's a legitimate case and the messages are legitimate, the AI or whatever, their filters may trigger, but it always ends up going back to humans to review anyway. And believe me, I get
Mm-hmm.
CC'd on all of a lot of these messages that say, all right,
Yeah.
this campaign has been flagged. This is what we're seeing. Here's what we need to be able to justify that it's not spam. And we answer immediately, and things continue as they were. So
Yep.
it sometimes does cause a brief blip in sending, but it really hasn't been as bad as it was in the past.
Yeah,
So
I
great
think it's
question, John.
also
Yeah.
it's important on that note too, right? Is that, I mean, I think that's one of the value adds that we have here at Commio is we really know we work with these compliance teams on a daily basis, sometimes
Yep.
on an hourly basis, and
Yep.
you know, uh, T-Mobile especially has really kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, set the bar with penalties
Yeah.
for stepping out of compliance, right? They have their penalties for sub-zero events, and it can cost you a lot of money, and so I think the key here is really to make sure that you've got someone who's kind of guiding you of, avoiding the type of messaging content that's going to trigger an event like that, right? And so, that's the stuff that we always want to avoid, and really just to get the optimum delivery and conversion rate. I think that's what everybody wants.
That's right.
It's
That's
important
right.
to know that if you don't follow the rules, it can bite you.
Yeah. And by the way, if you are curious what a lot of those not only the surcharges but also those penalties can be, just go over to our website, commio.com, click on resources, and you'll see
Mhm.
the SMS surcharge page, and it lists all of them. And you're right,
Yeah.
T-Mobile is more than half. Um, they're
Yep.
running a tight ship, so you want to make sure you don't run afoul of any of that. So let's go
Yep.
ahead and dive in. And I think, Scott, and I love that we bring this up early and often when we talk about messaging in general, but it really is so important to start with a plan. I think you don't want to give the task of registering brands or campaigns for any form of text messaging to probably the most technical people on your team. You want to start with somebody who can work across your teams to, like we see here, do your research and start
Mhm.
pulling the right information together to start the registration process, and
Mhm.
take your time, follow through on all of these things. And at the end, you're not going to have any issues after you hit the send button because you've done everything right, right? So let's go ahead
Yeah.
and begin with the plan.
Yeah, I think that's critical is what's your ultimate goal with text messaging, right? Is it something that's part of your daily transactional process with customers? You need to send an OTP 2FA text message, right, with a link to the sign up, or a notice about a charge on their account or something like that, right? And so no matter what type of text message that you're sending, there's a use case that's going to align to that. So those type of B2B enterprise type communications, again, transactional type of messaging, those are really easy. Those are straightforward. They don't create a lot of pain and concern for the carriers. And so it's still, you have to have a plan of action, right? I think, but if you're going to be using text messaging for marketing in business generation and driving revenue, then you really got to have a solid plan, and you got to understand what use case it's going to be. And then you got to be able to provide, use case samples, messaging samples.
Yeah,
You got to have all of your web product. You got to have a lot of stuff done before you submit, right? Submitting and getting a campaign approved is actually one of the final steps that you should be taking before you start sending text messages. It shouldn't be the first step.
that's right. And I think this last bullet's important. Pick a provider like Commio that has a group of messaging experts who are up on all the latest pieces and parts and plans and registration steps,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody who can help you through this because it can be a minefield. If you miss a step, can kind of guarantee that your campaign is going to be paused or challenged in some way. And it's easy to avoid those landmines if you work with a provider who will, work with you every step of the way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I get
Yeah.
approved. If, right, out of
Yeah.
the, you may struggle getting your brand approved. You may struggle getting if you get your
Yes.
brand approved, you may struggle getting campaigns approved, right? And the ultimate goal is to have a plan, work with a provider who knows all the steps and knows the things that you need that are required, right? So it's a smooth and easy process. It's not frustrating, right? You don't want to be banging your head on the wall saying this just isn't working. I'm just going to go back to email, right? That's
That's right.
that's not our goal, and we can definitely help you find success with it.
That's right. That's right. So we won't read off all these bullets, but these are some things you really want to be looking for when you start a campaign, when you're trying to find a provider. And, you know, here at
Mm-hmm.
Commio, obviously we offer all three different variations of the, messaging from short code to long code to toll free. There are use cases for each of those that make them unique. Some you can register, get things up and running very, very quickly. Other ones take several weeks or even a month or two, especially if you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about short code, right? So,
Yeah.
um, you just want to work with somebody who can help you decide which flavor is going to work best for you. And
Mm-hmm.
then all these other things come along with it. And I think one of the things I think people overlook, which makes us unique, is we have literally millions of phone numbers, right, available to our customers. So
Yeah.
if you commit, and by the way, and if you're in a state and we don't have a lot of numbers for you on our system today, we can
Mm-hmm.
special order and get them for you basically the same day. So
Yeah.
whether you
Yeah.
need one or 1,000, which
Yeah.
makes us unique.
I'll even throw this out there. I mean, a lot of the DCAs actually refer people to us to buy phone numbers because of our inventory and our knowledge of the messaging ecosystem. So the
Yeah.
DCAs actually, use us and work with us to help them with their business. So I
Right.
wanted to just, briefly talk about the full service, the short code 10 DLC and toll free, right? Today we're
Yeah.
talking about local numbers. And local numbers are just phenomenal, right? It's that local presence. You definitely have a much higher open rate with 10 DLC than you would traditionally like with toll free or short code. But there are use cases and circumstances where 10 DLC might not be the best bet. Toll free and short code might be a better bet for you, right? So,
Yeah.
and that's I think where we can kind of talk with you and consult and say this is really the option you should be going with. And we're going to always tell you the best option for your particular use case and what your goals are. So,
Yeah, yeah. They're all different in their own ways, right? And
yep,
there's lots of different things to take in consideration.
yep,
Um, so let's start with this, which I think is really important, is know the rules about how to build your opt-in list, right? So opt-in is so critical, right? And this is one of the
mm-hmm.
big challenges I see coming back when campaigns are challenged sometimes, that there was something not happening in the opt-in side of things, right?
Right, yep,
Yeah,
yeah. It's super critical, right? I mean, the rules are, and this is not best practice. This is actual, law, right? Under TCPA, you must have consent to send a text message. Now, there's different flavors of consent. There's implied consent, direct consent. But most recently, the FCC is still debating. There's been a lot of buzz around this over the last several months about this new rule, especially
right,
around lead gen, right? The FCC expects one-to-one opt-in. The carriers expect one-to-one opt-in, meaning that you have consent to send that consumer or subscriber that text message, that you didn't get their opt-in from a leads list or a
right.
third party type of thing, right? So
Yeah,
that is the rules. You need to have consent, and you need to have one-to-one direct consent from the consumer to send them a text message. So again, we also have all of this, and we've been kind of talking about this ebook, and Tim's going
right.
to bring that up at the end.
Yeah,
When it covers all of this, it has links, and it kind of obviously we can show you, get you to the website where you can read the TCPA language or CTIA, carrier AUPs. We kind of consolidate that to what you really need to know.
yeah,
And first of all, it's just you got to have consent, right? And so And a lot of that also under that consent, that's the kind of stuff that you need to have kind of in order before you submit your campaign.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that, and I'll bring this up, and this, we look at this data every day, and we work with our DCAs, and they provide this data as well. The majority of campaign rejections, whether it's 10 DLC or toll free, is due to missing opt-in information on the call to action. So it's not having the correct opt-in consent language on your website, like on your contact form. So if you're collecting a phone number and you say, "Hey, click this button to get a text message," right? You're not presenting the correct opt-in information, right? There's a very specific format and there's very specific language the carriers want to see, right? And some of that's like in this little sample here on the screen.
Yeah.
Is that you have to have a messaging frequency disclosure. You need to have a data rate disclosure, right? And then you always have to. This is mandatory. You got to have stop on air. Stop is the industry standard, and we always recommend that you use that. But you can also use end, cancel to stop, or there's a lot of different keywords. I think our ebook covers those
Yeah.
that you can use to opt out of receiving further text messages, right? So when you submit your campaign, it's going to go to a human being who's going to look at it, and the first thing they're going to look for is that consent language.
Right.
If it's missing and they can't find it, you're going to get rejected, and so
Yep.
you just lost the $15, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to have to go back and make the changes. So it's key to have that on everything,
Right.
and
Right.
not just on your website, but it's also you're required to provide sample messages, maybe one or two. And we see all the time that customers actually leave off, or we hear about customers leaving off the required stop, the stop to end at the end of the sample, right? So
Yep.
again, that sample message you're providing for campaign approval, that's got to be almost like the message you're getting ready to send out. It has to be
Yeah.
formatted correctly and everything has to be there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to summarize what you started out talking about too, Scott, is like, sort of the era of third party opt-in
Mm-hmm.
to get your lists is over. And you really need to own your website, own the property, own the opt-in pages, that
Mm-hmm.
people are opting in through. Again, so you have one-to-one approval to be able to send to somebody. And they're going to go look. They're going to go through the process probably themselves during the testing, during not testing, during the review part of your new campaign to make sure
Yeah.
that's all set up correctly. So
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
don't skip this, and yeah, don't sleep
Yeah.
on this. It's
Yeah.
important.
There's one in that last bullet, double opt-ins.
Yeah.
If your business case allows for that, it's always the best practice to have a double opt-in. So someone went to your website, they signed up, and they said, "Hey, send me promotional text message," or "Hey, send me account alerts." Right. One of the things that you can do is you can send them a double opt-in. Is you send them one text message
Right.
and say, "Hey, you have, we show that you just opted in to receive text messages. Reply with yes to continue."
Yep.
Right. And so that now you're getting that double confirmation that consumer really does want this information for you. It's also extremely important to know, and a lot of people, especially if you're doing this for commercial, promotional marketing, you've got to use, or you got to be able to capture that opt-in. A
Yep.
lot of people use Trusted Form, and there's a couple out there, but you need to be able to capture the time, date, ideally the IP address of when that subscriber actually opted in to receive that message.
Yep.
So, hopefully that never happens. But if you ever get an audit, what they call RCA request, they say, "Hey, we got a complaint on this. This mobile subscriber said they never opted in to receive this text message." You may be required to provide proof. So
Yep.
it's very important that before you do all of this, obviously having it on your website is important, but you have to be able to capture that opt-in. You have to be able to prove that subscriber opted in to receive your text message.
Yeah. And by the way, just I had a question come through too about DCAs. Just for those who don't, we're in this lingo all day long, so this is second nature to us. But a DCA is a direct carrier aggregator. So those
Mm-hmm.
are the folks that we work with that then they have the direct connects to the Verizons, AT&Ts, T-Mobiles of the world. So anyway, so
Yeah.
DCA is where we have to go through to get your traffic sent to the mobile
There's DCAs
carriers.
for short code, toll
Yeah.
free, and
Right.
10 DLC. There's less probably than I'd say less than 6 or 7 of them,
Yes.
and they
Yes.
are the conduit. They used to be called gateway providers, right? But they are the
Right.
ones that, like Tim said, has the direct binds to all the carriers.
Right.
Some only have binds to one carrier, but I think
Yeah.
3 or 4 have binds to all of them. And all text messages flow through those switches, right? And those are the ones that basically are the vetting the campaigns. They're the ones
Yep.
policing it. And so they're kind of that first step, or that first safety net before the messages get to the mobile carrier networks.
Yeah, because let's be real, the mobile carriers just want to be carriers. They want to send stuff. They want to
Yeah,
do the
yeah.
communicating
They want
part.
to make money.
Yeah, they don't want to be part of this. They don't want to be
Right.
part. Yeah, so not
Yeah.
surprising.
Yeah.
So now let's say so once you've got your web page set up correctly, you're capturing opt-in, you're recording it, all that's good. Next, you want to start thinking about registering your brand, right? So for
Mhm.
10-digit long code, we register brands and then we register campaigns under the brands, right?
Yeah, the first thing that you got to do as part, and I think we mentioned this earlier, right? The campaign registry
Hmm.
or 10DLC registry is really a traceback database,
Yeah.
right? It's basically, the first part of it is just really kind of pre-vetting and kind of scoring
Hmm.
a business and their use case of how they want to send text messages into the carrier ecosystems. And then the second part of that is the traceback. And so if there is a problem, if there is excessive spam or someone gets flagged for phishing or some kind of a fraud scheme, the carriers want to know exactly who that brand was. And then in the registry, they can actually look up who they are, right? What's their
Right.
address, their FEIN. They can get all the data they need in case there's additional escalations that need to happen, right? So that's really the whole purpose of it. If you're a provider and you're doing voice, you're omnichannel. We do tons of voice. You're probably familiar with stir shaken. It's a very
Yes.
similar process to stir shaken, right? It's just basically giving carriers or regulatory authorities and or law enforcement authorities, really kind of access to the chain of custody of where that call or that text message came from.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, Scott, if somebody's getting ready to register their brand, right? So, we say here that there are some differences between, whether you're enterprise agency, sole proprietor, or franchisee, right? So that'll make
Mhm.
you register a little differently.
Yeah, sole proprietor for the longest time. In fact, the DCA for 10 DLC wasn't even allowing sole proprietor because it
Right.
was a sole proprietor. Sometimes if it's one or two, it's a one person, single individual running a business out of their home office, right? They may not have a lot of the critical components required to meet qualification.
Mm.
And so, sole proprietor was kind of a sticky use case, but it is allowed, but there's a lot of criteria for that one, particularly now. So, that's definitely one of those things. If you are a sole proprietor or if you have customers who are sole proprietors, to reach out to us, and we can definitely kind of help you kind of decide what's going to be the best approach to get those type of use cases approved.
Yeah.
Franchisees, a lot of times you run into this is that you have let's say a large national organization, right? So you have one main FEIN, but you have hundreds of offices. And a perfect example of this is, let's say, auto insurance.
Yeah.
State Farm has one corporate office, they have one FEIN, but then you have agents. In franchise, I think of franchise, I think of like maybe a restaurant, right? But you
Yeah.
have, potentially hundreds of locations nationwide who want to register their campaigns. But the problem is they're really part of that parent corporation, right? So that FEIN is State Farm, and I forget where they're headquartered at, right? But you're an agent in Denver or Raleigh, and you're trying to get a campaign approved. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, there's a mismatch here, right? So, franchises, you could potentially run into some issues. We've gone through a lot of those use cases with customers. Most of them have been successful. We've had one or two that we just weren't able to get approved. But those are the things. Agencies, right? If you're basically, and we see that a lot, especially with performance marketing, omni-channel type companies. Large corporations, enterprises, even small businesses can hire a marketing agency to do all of this for them, right? So
Hmm.
you're the agency and you're writing the content, but you're really not the brand.
Yeah.
You're Tim's marketing agency, and you've got a customer at ABC, accounting that wants to run messaging. That's the thing, is that ABC accounting needs to be the registered brand, right? So
Yep.
there's some things around agency type of campaigns. And then enterprise, again, if it's your brand, it's your company, it's your FEIN, you're going to be writing the content and sending them. That's pretty straightforward, right? It's just going to come down into the type of use case that you want to apply it to. Is it going to be used for marketing? Is it going to use for account related alerts, OTP, 2FA? There's special ones for government. There's special ones for higher ed, or for K through 12 and higher education.
Yep.
So, we've got this in the ebook. I mean, I'm
Yep.
looking at the one right here, and the use cases. There's dozens of them, and it could be a lot of different things, right? But if you're going to be using it for a lot of different potential, scenarios, right? It's really important to just kind of know what's going to be the best one that you want to register it with. because you may not need to, if you know, say, well, you know, we were going to send out account alerts, but sometimes we also do want to send, hey, we're having a 20% sale, you know, this weekend kind of thing, right? Well, if you register the use case under account alerts, but you start sending promotional text messages, right,
Yeah.
that's out of compliance, right? So there could be a situation where what's the best one for everything?
Yeah. Gotcha. And I think it's important here too. We have here, have your EIN form handy. I think the reason for that is, whatever's on basically your tax form, your business information, that's what you want to register with to make sure that it matches up, right?
Yeah, so there's a couple companies that do the vetting for campaign registry, and that's exactly what they're looking. So if you say I'm XYZ brand and this is my FEIN, when you submit that, they're going to actually go and check that. They're going to go look
Yep.
into the Treasury Department's website, their database lookup, and see if there's a match, right? And if there's a mismatch, your FEIN doesn't match the name,
Yeah.
or if it doesn't match the address or the contact info, it could get rejected because there's something missing there. Now, there are certain situations too where it may get approved, but you may get a lower score, right? So your throughputs are typically determined by your brand score first and foremost, right? So you may not get the optimum throughput that you need because something was incorrect on the form or you're missing some data.
Hmm.
And I'll let me add one last thing, and obviously we're in the political season, so as
Yes.
part of, if you are a political entity, a PAC, a candidate, or you're running traffic for political candidates. I know we have a sample up here shortly coming up with some messages. There's another step, right? So you got to be registered. You got to go get an actually campaign verified token.
Yes.
I think it's campaignverify.org, right?
Yes.
And you need that token. So they're going to they're going to verify that you're registered with the FEC. They're going to verify your nonprofit status and that there's a digital footprint. And so in order for you to register a political brand, you need to have that campaign verified token, right? So there's an
Hmm.
extra step with that.
Exactly. James had an interesting question at this point, Scott. He said, how do you get a campaign with a franchisee where it's rejected due to the privacy policy of the franchise, right? So obviously you need a compliant privacy policy on the website. How do
Mm-hmm.
we work around that with franchisees?
Yeah, there's some challenges, but I think here's where the true value of Commio comes in. So, we work with the compliance and vetting team daily on a first name basis, right? So when your campaign is, once it's submitted or you're trying to get it submitted and it gets rejected, right? We've already got some kind of a tracking ID that we can reference. We'll open a ticket. We'll have a call if necessary, and we'll kind of talk through these particular issues, right? So those become the ICB, and we kind of we work one on one with the DCA to get those approved if possible. And sometimes it may require the parent corp or the main entity to make some changes to their privacy policies or their opt-in language. And if they're willing to do that and there's flexibility there, then it actually goes pretty smoothly. If
Hmm.
there's not, then we have to look at other options. But at the end of the day, it's really the DCA can either approve or disapprove that campaign, right? It's not necessarily that T-Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T are looking at this, right? They're relying on the DCA or the direct connect aggregator to say, hey, this is a safe brand and this is safe traffic.
Yeah.
So we can work with them to say, yeah, this is all legit. It's just this is the one thing that we're running into, and we can provide some additional data that might make them feel comfortable enough to go ahead and prove it and get it going.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, and Lewis also had a question too. He goes, what about something like, businesses that basically like operate in Spanish, for instance, and they're trying to register. Like apparently they've had some issues getting things approved because it's a different language. What have we come up with working with them with that?
So the DCA says that they support pretty much all like most foreign languages,
Hmm.
Spanish especially, right? So that being said, then there's some kind of a disconnect there, and so or maybe it's some language that's not mainstream. I'm not sure, but typically I'd say all we've had this question before, and we've gotten confirmation that especially if something in Spanish should not have any problem getting approved.
Right.
So something else is missing there.
Gotcha. All right. So once you get your brand registered, and I know, Scott, we wanted to mention here about establishing throughput, right? And this extra
Mhm.
vetting you can request. Why would somebody do that?
Well, yeah, and that's so again, if you submit a brand and that brand comes back. It's only been in business 6 months.
Right.
There's some kind of a mismatch, but you might get scored at the lowest possible throughput would be like 10,000 messages a day. And you're
Hmm.
like a market, and so you're a legitimate enterprise, and you have a huge customer base of direct opt-in customers. Like, that's not enough. I got to
Yep.
be able to send out 100,000 messages a day to our direct customers who are expecting this.
Yeah.
And so what you can do then is you can, and there's a fee for it. I can look it up if needed.
Mm.
You pay an additional fee. It could be $40. It could be 95. One of those two, and you can request additional vetting, and so that'll go out. And then you can provide additional information. I think there's a form, right? And you can provide maybe some more additional documentation to the vetting agency, and just kind of let them feel warm and comfortable that, okay, yeah, this is a legitimate business. And they changed their brand. They were in business for 20 years, and then 6 months ago they rebranded, and so that's why we don't see all of this stuff there, right? So you may be required to provide additional information. And then you could actually have your daily throughput go from 10K to, let's say, 200K,
Right.
depending on your use case, right? So there's definitely a way to do that. But a lot of the time, just by making sure your FEIN information is matched and correct,
Yeah.
you will avoid this step. I'd say that's one of the number one reasons you get scored too low, is your FIN that doesn't match what's in the database.
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right. So once you got the brand registered and approved, now it's time to start looking at your actual messaging, right?
Mm-hmm.
And matching that up and knowing the rules, the good old TCPA, CTIA, all
Mm-hmm.
their rules, right?
Yeah, there's a lot. And, again, we have links to TCPA, CTIA, even the carrier AUPs. It's a lot of, especially the TCPA, there's a lot to digest on there. And there are some certain rules about when you can send a text message,
Hmm.
and how many times, and how, if someone opts out, can you send a follow-up text message, right, without getting in trouble, right? So there's a lot of really important stuff with that. And we cover that in the ebook. Um, but the first and foremost, right? So let's say we've gotten through all the brand. Right now, you're like, hey, I got my brand approved. I got a good score. I've identified what use case I want to send. So now I've got to create a message. This is exactly what we're going to be sending to our customers.
Right.
Um, Really, really important. The first thing that you need is you got to always have a brand identifier. Every text message that you're going to send to a customer needs to have some kind of identification of who you are, right? So if you get a text message from Commio, it's going to say Commio, and it could have a colon, or Commio dash, hey, join us for this messaging best practices webinar Thursday at, let's say 2 p.m. EST. Here's the link to register, stop to end, right? So
Hmm.
first thing is you got to have a brand identifier at the beginning of the text message, and you always got to have that opt out at the back of the message, right? Now you can. There's been some kind of discussion, right? We talk about stop. I would really say just use stop in capital letters. It's the industry standard. It's what everybody expects to see. So you would say reply or text stop to end.
Yep.
I always like adding, if you've got enough characters left in your message, right? Then you could say reply stop at any time to end, right?
Yeah.
I always like to remind customers that, hey, you don't have to hit stop on, it kind of just and make sure that you're covering the base, that the customer knows that they can stop this at any point in the dialogue.
Yep. Exactly.
To opt out, you've got your content, right? We talk about watch your tone, right? So
Yeah.
one of the things too, we know that the carrier spam filters are looking for specific phrases, right? Hey, win, roll the dice, cash, debt. They're looking for very specific keywords, especially under CTIA, right? There's an acronym called SHAFT, sex, hate, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. Those spam filters are looking for keywords that align to that, to those particular categories. They're looking for also keywords and phrases that are typically known spam campaigns. Perfect example is like, the Camp Lejeune toxic water. If you're using the word Camp Lejeune, it's going to get
Yeah.
flagged now because
Yep.
it's been identified as a known spam campaign.
Right.
But the other thing too, right? So you're not only having to make sure that you're not going to get it tripped up in the carrier spam filters, but you also want to make sure that your tone, right? When you send a text message to a consumer or a subscriber, they know who you are. The tone is not abrasive.
Hmm.
Hey Tim, I guess you don't really care about this.
Right.
So and so is gonna just take their business elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
That's the one thing, and it's hard, especially with political text messaging. But you got to make sure that your tone is commercial, it's polite if possible, and if at the very least neutral, right? Because what happens is if you send an abrasive text message to a subscriber, um, best case they're just they're just going to reply stop and they're going to opt out.
Yep.
Worst cases are going to file a complaint. They'll flag it under 7726, right, which is a way that subscribers can forward a text message to Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile, or they can actually call their carrier and really escalate that. So that can cause you a lot of trouble just because your message tone was really abrasive and off.
Yeah. And I think
So
we got a question too, like, how many of those does it take to cause a problem? The answer is one.
it can take one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. That's why I got to be careful.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and that's the thing, right? So the carriers and the phone manufacturers, Apple and Android, have made it very easy for subscribers to flag your text message as spam. And I
Yeah.
think we've all seen that. You've gone through it, and you can look through your history, and you can go back and say, I'm gonna, once every 3 months, I'm gonna go clean out my inbox. And you start scrolling through, and then you start seeing some text messages, right, that are like 3 or 4 months old. And the subscriber's like, I don't remember that one is delete. And then it says, would you like to delete and report as spam? Like, sure. Right. That could be just the one.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
and that's the hard part, right? So that's another thing that we have to navigate through. So, really making sure that the message is valuable to that consumer. All of these components are going to make a really big deal. The other thing too, where we see a lot of problems with message content or samples, is the URLs, right? Your
Yes.
URLs that if you're sharing a web link in your text message, the URL should be really your brand. So commio.com/,
Something. Yeah.
3Y26. So I know a lot of people in the marketing space use tracking IDs.
Yeah.
And sometimes the tracking IDs can be 12 to 16 characters or longer.
Right.
And they use, numbers and letters, right? Best practice is to avoid that. Try to get your tracking IDs. If you have to use them, consolidate those down. And the best idea, if you are running a marketing campaign, would be, commio.com/, webinar special, right? Use actual landing pages with keywords
Yeah.
versus, and then have maybe, 2, 3, 5, 6, right? If you have to use that. So,
Yeah.
the old, the reason we have the registry, right, was the day when everybody was cycling numbers. They were using bit.ly shorteners to hide or mask the URLs. And so these adaptive or these AI spam filters are looking for those combinations. If you're sending a URL that's a shortened URL, you're number one, you're not probably going to get it approved if you submit it like that. And then if you use a real brand, but then you start using a shortened URL after the fact, chances are it's going to get flagged. It's going to get caught up in the filters anyways. And if it gets escalated, you're going to get in trouble for noncompliance because you actually started sending something that was outside of what was approved.
Yeah. Yeah. And Scott, I want to be cognizant of the time too. I know that we're
Yep.
we're we're pretty far in here, so I know we've got a lot to cover. So let's motor through. I
Yeah.
think just briefly here, guys, the last two things, and again, we've said this before on other webinars, but this is probably the year that you want to think about having an employee be a compliance officer,
Mm-hmm.
somebody who has a title and a role, whether they're part-time or part of your full-time team, that all of your messaging, all your communications go through and are reviewed by one person. So that's the person who can interact, for instance, with our experts to, make sure that they're up on the latest compliance measures in this space. But you don't want to leave it to somebody that's just doing this as a one-off and doesn't really understand the ins and outs to
Mm-hmm.
avoid getting into trouble. And lastly, too, that person, or your provider can help you make sure the copy is approved before you even take the next step of registering your campaign under your
Mm-hmm.
brands, right?
Yeah.
That's key.
And at the very least, and we can help with that, right? We understand compliance. I think the first thing is
Yep.
if you don't have the resources to hire or assign compliance to someone on your team, you can have a compliance kind of an overview and you can schedule that with Commio. We'll kind of tell you the things that you need to be paying attention to. And the ebook is going to cover a lot of this. So it's going to
Yes.
give you, a pretty solid base. But and I also can't, the simplest thing too is when you are submitting your messaging content, use spell check, grammar check, right? I mean,
Yes.
if it looks spammy and smells spammy, it's spammy, right? So
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot of the times we have this perception when we get a text message from someone and it's got a lot of misspelling or grammar, it's like, oh, this is an overseas scammer. That's the
Mhm.
perception.
Yep.
Avoid that. Use spammer and spammer check, grammar and spelling check on your
Yeah.
copy before you submit it.
Exactly. And make sure that what you're submitting is actually what you're going to send, right? Like,
Always.
you don't want to rush
Yep.
it. Yeah, send something that's a draft or
Hmm.
anyway, yeah, there you go.
Yep.
So now that we've got the brand registered, we've done a messaging exercise, we know what we want to send, it's approved. Now it's all about registering the campaigns. And we've already talked about a bunch of this, Scott, but it's like making sure that, the forms, for the opt-in, we already talked about that. It's important to have your opt-in form. You're capturing ideally, IP addresses, as well as date and time of opt-in
Yep.
and ideally doing double opt-in. But then now we want to talk about things about privacy policies and terms and conditions because that's probably like one of the number one things that gets flagged, right? Is that people
Yep.
forget to update their privacy policy.
Yeah. You submit a campaign, you submit a use case, and here's my sample message. Here's the opt-in, commio.com/, 10 DLC webinar special.
Yeah.
You go to that page and there's a contact form and it just says, hey, enter your phone number here to get text messages. Submit. Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and we have some samples we can show here, but
Right.
that doesn't work. And so when you're submitting that to the DCAs, they're going to go look, and they're
Yeah.
going to click your link and they go to your website, and make sure your website's working. That's the other thing too.
Yeah.
And if they expect to see a secure website, so making sure that your SSL certificate is active. We've had
Yep.
campaigns and a lot of hoops to go through when we give them a URL and it goes and says 404 not found, or the big old flashing not safe, go back to safety, right? You
Yes.
don't want to have that happen on your text message and having the DCA see those things. So make sure all of those things are in order.
Yeah.
But they're going to go right to your site and they're going to see where you're collecting the opt-in from the
Hmm.
subscriber, right? So the opt-in is usually like, hey, contact us, or to get alerts, you provide your name and you provide your phone number, maybe your email address. And then you got to have that specific language for the consumer to see when they're providing their phone number, right? So first and foremost is that you can't, what the carriers don't want to see is you're saying, hey, I agree, by clicking here, I agree to receive text messages and I agree to the privacy policy and the terms and conditions,
Yep.
right? They don't want to see that. They want to see the mobile opt-in separated from email, separated from the privacy policy, because you may have certain things in your privacy policy or your terms and conditions that really don't relate to mobile messaging, right? So they're saying by agreeing to these, you're consenting to get a text message. If you want to use text messaging, that's got to be separate, and it's got to be separate by use case. So we'll have a sample of that.
Right.
The one thing too, so your privacy policy, your terms and conditions, if you're doing a shortcode, you actually have to have a mobile terms and conditions, which has a lot more content. We have samples for those who are interested in that. And
Yeah.
it's probably a good idea if you're doing 10 DLC and toll free as well. If messaging is a big part of your communications program, you got to really think about adding the required language in these sites or
Yep.
these pages.
Yep.
The
And
first
again,
thing
this.
that they're looking was that.
Yeah. No. No. Go ahead.
Yeah. So when you submit a campaign, the DCA, that the vetting person is going to go into your website. They're going to look at your opt-in form. They're going to make sure that language is there. That looks good. And then they're going to go down to your privacy policy, and then they're going to open up that page. And keep in mind, these people are trying to vet hundreds of campaigns a day, maybe thousands. So they have a very set process that they go through. And the first thing that they're going to do is hit Control F, and they're going to look for the word share or third party, right? It immediately takes them to any language on your site that says, okay, we are going to share your personal information, including your mobile number, to third parties. If they see that language, it's declined.
Yes.
What you want to do is have that, as long as it aligns to your business case, right? You want to have the language that says, we do not, in big bold letters, we do not share your mobile subscriber opt-in information with third parties,
Yep.
right? You make that present, they're looking for it, put it right there at the top or put it in big bold letters. They're going to see that and they're going to move on. They may go check the terms and conditions, do the same thing. And so if you've got that in order, they just check the box and they move on to the other stuff. And that's
Yeah.
going to be, and those are the critical things that you need to have in order just to get your campaigns approved.
Yeah.
If any of those are out, then you're going to get a rejection.
Again, the ebook, we're going to have examples in just a minute. So, I mean, all this stuff exists and you won't be caught flat-footed. We're going to make sure you know. By the way, just had a great question, Scott. Again, I love getting them during the webinar here. Somebody said, look, what if, we're just a small business that wants to do two-way communications with our customers. We don't want to register brands or campaigns. There's no content review, no copy approval. What do we need to do text messaging, you know, one to one? So how would you answer that, Scott?
Well, for text messaging to mobile subscribers using their chat or their messaging apps, you got to go through this process. The
Yeah.
only other options are do it web chat or use an app.
There you go. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I think it's a worthy question because somebody thinks, well, all I want to do is be able to text back and forth with my customers. Well, the reality is there's two types of text messaging, right, Scott? There's
Mhm.
P2P, that's person to person. So you pick up this
Yep.
phone and you're literally texting somebody one-on-one. I didn't have to register to be able to do that. I mean, I pay Verizon, right? But that's it.
Mhm.
But if you use a machine in any way to do the back and forth outside of, like you said, an app or some other special application, you still need to register, right?
Correct. Yeah. So we
And
don't have yeah. So and
yeah,
I'm glad you brought that up.
yeah,
I mean, pretty much now all of the CSPs like Commio and all the DCAs, everything is now running on A to P, right?
yeah,
Which is that automated application, not the person to person, but application to person. We call them binds, which are basically how we talk to the carriers. And so there's only A to P. There's not even P to P really anymore. And so
right,
pretty much
right.
anything that you're sending to Commio has to be registered.
That's right.
Like Tim said,
That's right.
if you don't want to avoid all of this, then you'd have to use your personal cell phone.
Exactly. Exactly. And actually, Lewis had another great question too here, which I think makes sense is, how will it work for a client that doesn't generate leads and doesn't even have a website? People are calling and texting the business. How would they submit a campaign? I think, does that kind of get to the level of like if they're a doctor, if they're a doctor's
Mm-hmm.
office, and maybe they don't have a website, I don't know why they wouldn't, but let's say they don't, that's
Mm-hmm.
when we have to revert to good old pieces of paper, right? To capture
Well, I
opt-in.
mean, there are options, and we see this more with short code. Someone, I mean, if you're going to have a sign in your lobby, it says, "Hey, to get information." I think most doctors' offices use CRMs,
Yeah.
healthcare-based CRMs,
Yep.
and so when you create an account, right, or you're going to get a notice from your doctor's office, and that initial notice may come through email. A lot of people send an email, and that email actually has the opt-in information. Click here to provide your phone number, and it goes to the CRM, and you can register that. That's
Yeah.
what that language should be, right? It should also be in the email.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a lot of things. There's going to be unique cases like that, and we can help kind of provide guidance on how to
Right.
do it.
Yeah.
A lot of times a shortcode, you see a shortcode on a billboard, right? It says, "Hey, text, join to 12345," and then they can opt in that way. And then you give them, "Hey, do you agree to opt in, or are you consent to
Right.
opt in receiving text?" And they say yes.
Yeah.
That's a digital opt in, right?
Yep.
Versus a
Exactly.
web based opt in.
Yeah, I think these are great questions. There's so many edge cases, Scott. We see them every day. So if you have a question like that, after the webinar, just go to our website, go to the get a demo, sign up, whatever, go to our support page. We'll definitely spend time and vet whatever you'd like us to look at.
Sure.
Obviously you don't even have to be a customer. We're happy to help.
Happy to help you.
So let's go ahead and continue. So here we go. Here's the privacy policies we talked about, right? And that's that sentence that you were talking about at the bottom. That's what they're
Yep.
looking for, right?
Yep. Yeah, at the very least, and again, as long as this aligns to your business case, right? You want to have that on there. And here's a real important thing: you don't want to put that on there, and then just to get it approved, and then the minute you start running traffic, right, you are sharing data. That's immediately
Yeah,
the fast track to get blocked and get actually blacklisted by the carriers, right? So you can't say one thing to get approved and then completely change your messaging content and start sharing that information, because if you get caught doing it, it's pretty strict. And if it's on T-Mobile, you're facing some steep penalties,
yeah.
right?
So I think you'd agree here, Scott. So obviously, this bottom sentence is what they're really going to look for because obviously, for law enforcement only, if
Mm-hmm.
for some reason you send somebody hacks your account and starts sending bad traffic, we're going to have to, provide information back up the chain to be able to find that out. So anyway, it's for law
Yeah, I think
enforcement
the
only.
one is that most people want to see is we don't share third party information for marketing purposes, and that could
Right.
be commercial, right? So,
Exactly. Exactly. And then up above here too, obviously you can bullet it out. There may be, times where you will share the information, but these are the only times we'll do it, right? And here's the
yep,
bullets. So you can read that
yep,
on your own as well. That it's also in the ebook as well.
yep.
So, but the big takeaway here is you can't avoid not having this in your privacy policy and be a messaging customer. You got to have it in there. It has to be there.
Yep.
So
Yep.
they're going to look for it. Um, and here's another one as well, right? So I guess the question here, Scott, is this a good privacy policy for what we're trying to do here? I'm actually reading through here.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing too,
Yeah.
right? I mean, privacy policies cover a lot of stuff, right?
Hmm.
And so, I
Yep.
mean, it's also about, how you share cookies on your website and and if you're pulling in content from other third-party providers for your website like Google,
Hmm.
right? How that information is shared, how it's collected, and so forth, right? So, privacy policies can be pretty lengthy, and if you are, for the privacy policy especially, right? Like you just showed, it's really important to say, hey, we're not going to share your mobile subscriber information to third parties, right?
Yep.
That's required, right? So, and if we have samples for the privacy policies, we have mobile terms and conditions samples that we can provide to people who are looking for that kind of content, right? That kind of stuff really helps get you fast track to approval.
Yeah.
And earlier we talked about what the carriers are really looking for, right? So, and I get it. Sometimes, if you're a web designer, Tim in the marketing side, right? You want your website to look clean and look fresh, and you don't want to have all of this legal language on your contact form. But unfortunately, that's required.
Yeah.
And what the carriers are really looking for, right, is that your opt-in to receive text messages is not tied to anything else. It's not tied to email. It's not tied to your privacy policy. It's not tied to your terms and conditions. It specifically exists just for mobile text messaging. And go a step further, they actually want that consent to be by use case. So the subscriber goes into into your contact form. They're going to see several boxes. I agree to receive text messages for account related alerts and notifications. Stop. And then the second box is I agree to receive text messages for marketing and promotions, right?
Yep.
You can't say that by opting in that they're going to receive account related information and they have no way to opt out of the marketing stuff.
Right.
So every use case needs to have its own opt out. And again, if you're looking at the samples, if you can see them, you got to have your frequency disclosure and you have to have your
Yes.
messaging and data rates disclosure. There's additional things about, there's no guarantee of message delivery with certain carriers. We have samples of really what the ideal opt out language should look like and how it should be formatted.
Yep. Yep. And in this case, that you're absolutely right. Now, these left examples are spot on and very detailed. The one
Yep.
on the right, not detailed enough. Again, it looks beautiful. The marketing person to me says great landing page,
Yeah.
but you're going to
Yeah.
get in trouble if you put this forward.
Well,
So
you submit that campaign, the vetting person is going to
yeah,
immediately, that's the first thing they're going to go to is your opt in. And they're going to look at that and say, none of the language that's on the left is
yes,
on this contact form. And it's immediate decline. It's like, number one,
correct.
your campaign just got declined.
Yeah,
You have to restart the process, and you just lost $15 in the vetting fee,
yeah,
right?
and
So
nobody wants to do that. Yeah,
nobody
for
wants to
sure.
do that.
Yeah, and here's some other examples as well. And we've all
Mm-hmm.
seen these, right? And you can see how detailed the small text is getting, and it always tells you how to end it, how to stop it, and
Mm-hmm.
there's your frequency disclosure. Yeah, and sometimes, they give you a delicious treat if you
Yeah,
give them your
yeah.
phone number.
Yeah, and another thing that I'm seeing a lot more with the carriers too is having an opt out option. If you're doing short code, it's really it's not required, but it's really it's best practice to add an opt out on your actual website. So you can have your contact form, right? And then, somewhere in your web links, maybe it's part of that contact form, click here to unsubscribe.
Yeah,
Right. What the carriers want to see is that you're giving the consumer multiple mechanisms to opt out of receiving these text messages.
yep.
Right. So one
Make
is
it
just
easy.
replying stop. The other one is going to the website, hitting unsubscribe, or even, or call an 800 number or call a local number to talk to an agent to unsubscribe. Right. So
Right.
having all those things really make it smooth to get campaigns approved.
Yeah. Yeah. It always reminds me, Scott, because obviously I do a lot of email marketing, and every
Mm-hmm.
single one of my emails has a very conspicuous unsubscribe and manage preferences link on the footer. And
Yep.
I still get 4 or 5 a day saying, I want to leave, I want to get off this list. I'm like, all right, so I'll go down and click it. It's the same thing
Mm-hmm.
with this. You want to give people two or three ways to stop the messages. And
Yep.
because if you make it hard, they are going to report you. And again, it only takes one to
Yeah.
start the process of unraveling all your hard work.
And I'll add one thing to that too, right? And I don't know if we have this on the bullet, I think it's in the ebook, is, make sure your opt out process works, right? The worst thing
Yes.
is when someone hits stop,
Yep.
your system doesn't register the stop, and you keep sending those messages. Right now, like I said, worst, the best case is when someone doesn't like your content, they reply with stop and it ends, right? And they let it go,
Yep.
they move on. What
Right.
happens, what escalates really quickly, is when they've already opted out and you keep sending that message to them.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And it's not enough to, wait and collect them, like say at the end of the day and process them. Like you need to be doing it in real time.
Mm-hmm.
You really do. And you and I've talked about this. Like when I hit stop, if I don't immediately see, hey, we're confirming that you're opted out. It escalates the chance that somebody's going to report it as spam.
Yeah,
Going forward.
and those are escalations. Those are more severe, right? So we want to
Yes,
avoid those all
that's
at all
right.
costs. So yeah.
You can see here. So here's a couple examples, guys, of both good, bad, and different messages, and you can already sort of see that some of these are problematic, and
Mm-hmm.
some of them are good. So,
Yep.
and right away I see this bitly, and I just cringe right away. Like you can't use shorteners, right? You need to
Yeah,
use your
the
own
first
domain.
one, and I know we're short for time now,
Yes,
but
right.
let's say let's just look at the first one. It's missing who you are, your brand identifier, right? So they don't know who
Right.
you are, right?
Yep.
Please use this link below. It's a bit.ly. It doesn't have any registered domain. It's not part of your brand. There's no
Yep.
opt-out language,
Yep.
right? Number one, if you
Exactly.
submitted that with a campaign, that's immediately rejected.
Yeah.
If you got approved for a campaign and you started that content, that's going to get you in trouble.
That's right.
And they're going to look for that. So
That's right. And a lot of these other ones you can see are better. They have the right language in there, but you're right, we don't have a ton of time.
yep.
And look at this lovely MMS message that
Yeah,
came through.
MMS is, that's the
Yeah.
thing. I mean, part of this too is, with MMS, that is now can be vetted through the campaign registry. So you still have to
Yeah.
provide your samples. And you also want to check that there's specific technical requirements for MMS by carrier, file size. Your throughputs are probably going to be lower with MMS, right? So you got to look and determine, is MMS the best option? If you say it's got to be MMS, and we see a lot of MMS with political, there's some additional considerations that you have to understand on the
Yes.
messaging.
Yes. And they also have their own loopholes, of course, right? Anyway,
Absolutely.
we've done whole webinars just on political, and
Yep.
yeah, they don't even necessarily have to follow all the rules. And by the way, here, so we're getting near the end, guys. I know we've covered a lot, and we're talking about the ebook in a minute, but there's also this really great checklist that we give out to our customers that really summarizes a lot of the stuff that Scott's been telling us already. Is look, if you're going to do 10 DLC long code, what's your checklist of things that you need to do? And just literally, you're going to want to look at every single one of these and check the box when you're done, right? It's it's
Mm-hmm.
it's really that easy. So,
Yep.
and by the way, this list keeps getting longer, but at least they're there.
That's
At
not our
least
fault.
it isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
So
and I'll be honest with you, the reason we have to do all of this, right, is for the years of the spammers, like Tim mentioned, the guys that were out there doing the fraud, the scams. They were snowshoeing and using fake numbers, right? I mean, they're the ones we
yeah,
get to thank for all of this. So,
correct, correct.
yep.
Um, yeah, and I know we wanted to talk about DLR, delivery receipts, right? So this is one of the pieces of information that you have access to be able to check on your campaigns, right?
Yeah. So, and the other part of the whole process is once you're sending your messages, right, you want to be looking at your delivery rates. If you're seeing delivery rates that are in the 60-70% range, there's something wrong with the content. It's getting blocked. We can help you look at that. You want to look at your opt out responses. Not everybody's going to respond with stop, right? So you want to look at, okay, and you can use your MDR so you can see kind of if you're calculating, your opt in rate or your opt out rates, looking at your failure rates. So DLRs really provide a really good information about how healthy your campaigns are in your messaging campaign. And it's also a really good indicator if there's something wrong.
Exactly, exactly. And last but not least is our brand new ebook, and actually Scott was the one who brought this to our attention. We've had other resources available for 10 DLC, but over the last year in particular, there's been so many changes, updates. It's so there's so many little things that you need to do to make sure that you're in compliance, as well as making sure your traffic is flowing consistently day after day. It really made sense to summarize it in a new ebook. So all of you for registering for this webinar, you're going to get a direct link to it along with the recording of this webinar. We'll be offering it to all of our prospects as well, but it's just so important to have a guidebook to being successful with 10 DLC. So everything's in here.
Yeah.
And we mentioned, blueprints for privacy policy, opt-in information, great examples of what to do and what not to do. So really
Mhm.
excited to get this out into the world. And by the way, this is stuff that, our DCAs above us, we're actually in the middle of, we're doing a case study with them because they were so happy with our level of education and working with people like you, which we know that that's why we're here at Commio. We've always operated the business that way is, we're here to educate you to make sure that the whole ecosystem is better, and that everybody gets what they need.
Yeah, I think the one last thing I'd add, I know we're over, is, if you're new to this whole thing, don't be discouraged. We do this every day, and it's not just about, making sure you pick a provider who just understands. Well, it's TCP, it says you got to do this and this. You got to really pick people who understand the compliance, but understand what the carriers like and don't like. Unlike the voice world, the mobile carriers, it's their rules, right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
TCPA and CTIA. Those, TCPA are actual federal law. CTIA are really industry best practices, but it really comes down to the carrier's rules. It's their networks. And you got to really understand what works and what doesn't work for T-Mobile versus Verizon. We know that.
yeah,
We know exactly what's going to get blocked on T-Mobile versus Verizon. We know what's going to probably trigger a sub-zero for you. Things to do, not to do, right? And I think that's the key. We bring that consultative, expertise to really make sure that you're going to get the best value and the best, success with messaging. So always keep that in mind.
exactly. Well, Scott, we did have a few questions. Chuck was asking, what is the texting volume limit for using the use case of low volume? Like, what do they mean by low volume? Do you know?
That's a great question. I think it's less than 1,000 or something
Per
like that per
per
day. It's
day?
pretty low. Yeah.
1,000 per day.
So if you're a
Okay.
marketing company and you're trying to send out a nationwide notification, you want to register the low volume, right? And the low volume, I'm looking at it here. Yeah, it's like 2,000.
Okay.
It's 2,000 messages a day, right? So,
Yeah.
um, and for someone who's an individual and it's a small business and you've only got three or 400 customers, that's probably perfect, right? And the
Yeah.
carriers look at that. They're going to say, okay, the use case is for 2,000 or for low volume, and they're going to look at your all the other stuff that we've talked about, and it's going to, yeah, they're going to kind of look at your campaign and your content as low risk,
Yeah.
right? The customers that say that they need 200,000 a day, they're like, well, these guys can do a lot of damage real quick. So they're really going to scrutinize your content. They're going to scrutinize everything in your campaign registration process.
Exactly. I think we had another question here about small campaigns. It's one of the folks is saying that low volume mixed is what, 75 TPS for AT&T, 2,000 per day for T-Mobile. There you go. So
Yeah.
2,000 a day is T-Mobile. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to go
I don't
back
have
and look
all
at this.
those memorized. So I
Yeah.
actually have the TCR list, right, of what are
Yeah.
those, categories. And we do have those on our site, right? So, and
Right.
we've covered that
Right.
quite a bit. So, and that's one of
Yeah.
the things too, where we can sit down and kind of talk about really what you need. And
Yeah.
is that particular use case going to, number one, is that the one you need to use that you're going to qualify for? But is that enough to meet your throughput requirements? Because in certain situations, you're like, man, that's not enough, right? Well, that might be a situation where you need to move to toll free or to a shortcut.
Yeah. Someone's asking where to go to register. So, I mean, obviously, folks can go directly to the campaign registry website and register there, right? I mean, we can do it as well.
You can
But
register brand campaigns there, but the problem is
yeah.
you can't register phone numbers there, right? That we are
Yes.
that component allows you
Right.
to tie our large inventory of phone numbers to your campaigns,
That's right.
right? So,
Yeah. You still need a provider to do that part. That's for sure.
yep.
Well, great. Well, Scott, that kind of brings us to the end here. I think, you know, we've done a couple webinars about 10DLC. I think this is a
Mm-hmm.
great summary of it, a great update, and I'm really excited that we have this ebook now that really does an even better job of making it really accessible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you and I would both agree, like this time last year, things were kind of in an upheaval stage, and
Mm-hmm.
there was a lot of businesses that were moving messaging away from 10DLC because of all these rules.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you and I would agree things have really settled down now. Things are pretty stable, and we've got a process in place that's working. And by the way, the,
Yep.
the high volume users are doing all this through APIs. So we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing brands and campaigns registering all day long across our
Hundreds of, yeah,
platform.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yep. Yep. No, I agree. Yeah,
yeah,
we're kind
yeah,
of at the tail end of it, and not to
right.
say things can change in the future, but
Yeah,
I think we've really kind of gone through the real turbulent part of the registration process. I mean, in
yeah,
messaging all in general, right? So
exactly.
it looks like it's
Yeah,
going to be a smoother sailing moving forward.
exactly. So again, if you have any questions, and whether or not you're a high volume user or a low volume user, go over to Commio.com, click on contact us or get a demo. Sit down and talk with, Andy, our sales engineer. We can get Scott to answer any questions that you might have. Our whole team is very well trained. And, we really have spent a lot of time and energy keeping our team up to date on compliance and registration priorities.
Mhm.
And it's just part of what we do now. And we're happy to help and play that role in the ecosphere here, for
Yeah.
messaging as well as for voice. And again, if you just need phone numbers, we're also a great source for that as well. So we're happy to help in any way that we can. So
Yep.
with that, Scott, again, thank you for
You
spending
bet.
spending some time with us. And
Thanks everybody for joining us today. Good,
yeah,
good questions. Great questions.
yeah, excellent. And again, this session has been recorded, and you will get an email, first thing tomorrow, also with a link to the new ebook. And we'd love your feedback, any thoughts, anything you think is missing. I mean, we vetted the heck out of that thing, so I don't think we missed anything, Scott. But
Yeah.
maybe there's something that you
I
might
think
have a
there's
question
another an
about.
hour, hour and a half to cover. So there's a lot of stuff that, and would
Yeah,
definitely rush through it, but
yeah,
maybe
for
next
sure.
time.
Oh, there definitely will be a next time. So thanks again, guys, for spending part of your day with us. We hope you found this helpful. And by the way, when you get that email, not only can you click through and sign up to talk to one of us live, but if you hit reply, I actually physically get those emails. So whatever questions you have, you don't even have to pick up a phone and talk to us. Just email me and I'll make sure I get an answer for you. So
Yeah.
thanks again, everybody, and hope you have a great week and thanks for your time.